Hey everyone, it's Ben, and I know it's been a while since I've done one of these, but I thought I'd share something with you today that I think you'll find very, very easy and also useful. I think we're all familiar with this scenario where we've used starter content meshes, especially those in the architecture folder, to sort of block out levels. I'm sure you're familiar with these meshes, and this floor plan is by no means complete. But one thing that used to frustrate me is the fact that as I was building out these structures, I wanted the outside of my building to appear to be made out of one type of material, but the inside of the building to be made out of a different material. So let me give you an example of the problem that I'm trying to illustrate. So I'll go into just, I'm only going to use starter content today, but suppose that I wanted, let's say, this surface to be made out of brick. Well, that might apply to the exterior of the building, but it doesn't mean that I necessarily want the inner wall to be made of brick. And that used to cause me trouble because this particular mesh only has one material element slot. And so, I used to do that, the sort of hacky solution of like taking the mesh and I would just pull out a copy of it just a little bit and apply a different material to that. And that is just not necessarily the best way to go, not the most performant. And now that we have certain tools that we didn't have before, we can add these extra material elements to meshes within Unreal without having to export them to other DCC software. So I would like to show you how to do that. So again, all of these meshes that I'm using come from starter content architecture directories. So let's go into there, starter content architecture. And so I've got more than one example of the 400 by 400 wall. I'm using at least one example of the 400 by 400 door and the window walls. All of these are the 400 by 400. And I started this little floor plan just using this floor mesh, which actually only one side of this typically is going to be seen unless I turn the same thing into a roof at some point. But what I plan to show you today can be applied to any of these meshes. And we're going to solve this problem together. So let's begin with a good example. One thing I used in this particular level block out is several instances of this 400 by 400 wall. You can see that I've got one right here. I've got one back there. I've got one right here. I also use the 400 by 400 door and a couple of windows and so forth. What I show you can be applied to any and all of these, and we'll solve the problem of having to use only one material element if I want something to look like it's made of one material element. For example, if I want this to look like it's made of brick on the outside, I might want it to look like it's made of something else on the inside without having to use twice as many meshes. So we're going to dip our toe into modeling mode, which is a relatively new feature in Unreal Engine. And I have to admit that it intimidates even me because I'm not a professional 3D modeler. But I think you're going to find this technique to be reasonably easy and not too fussy. And it's a good way to get started. So let's use this 400 by 400 wall as an example. All of these static meshes that are in the architecture folder in starter content, I don't necessarily want to alter them. So in this directory, I'm going to make a new subdirectory or a new folder, and I'm going to call it modified meshes. And one of the things that I can do, for example, is I could take this 400 by 400 wall, and I can just drag it over here and make a copy of it. And that way I'm not overwriting the original mesh, but I'm going to make a change to this one. A good idea would be to rename this right now, and I'm going to do exactly that. Normally I would use my F2 key, but my F2 key on this particular computer, my function keys are bound to other things. So I'll just use rename right here in the menu, and I'll call this one SM underscore 400 by 400 wall segment. Give it a name so that it is a little bit different from the default mesh. The next step is to drag this mesh into your world, and ultimately we're going to delete this, but place it in any location such that you can see all of the faces, both sides, and because it has some thickness to it or depth, you want to be able to see the lower edge and the sides and also the top. Just like the original mesh, this only has one material element, but we're going to fix that. So keep this mesh, this duplicated mesh, selected for the time being. And we are now going to go into modeling mode. So I'll select modeling mode from the drop-down right here, modeling. And if you're in version 5.3 or later, that should already be enabled. If it's not enabled for you for some reason, you can go into your plugins settings and search for modeling and just make sure that the modeling tools editor mode is enabled. As you know, when you enable a plugin, usually you'll be prompted to restart your engine. So do that if necessary. For most of you, that won't be necessary. Okay, so I've got this duplicated mesh here in the scene and I'm in modeling mode. Now we just have to be a little careful, that's all. This is not complicated. You just have to be a little bit meticulous about it. So with this mesh selected, I'm going to click the Mesh Attributes button in the modeling mode controls, and I'm going to choose Edit Materials, this button right here. So this was actually my first venture into the modeling tools. I don't even consider myself a 3D modeler necessarily. Most of the meshes that I use come from other sources. But I want to improve my skills in this area, and this was a good place to start. So what we're going to do is we're going to add additional material element slots so that I can apply different materials to one face compared to the opposite face and also to the edges. This only has one material element, as does the original mesh from which it was duplicated. But we're going to make something unique here that has the same proportions, but 3 material elements that we can edit instead. So here is the first step. We must change the selection mode from brush, open this menu, and we're going to choose this last option on the bottom of the drop-down that says all within angle. What this will allow you to do is to use the brush to select triangles. And with the brush size the way it is, I can select an entire face. Depending on the mesh that you're going to edit, you might have to adjust the brush size. But right now I can select an entire face. So I've done so already. Just by doing that, you can see that it's shaded. We also want to disable this parameter where it says hit back faces. Please turn that off, and we're going to scroll down just a little bit. Now, we already know that this has only one material element at index 0, but we're going to add one more. Actually, we're going to add 2 more. So let's begin by adding an array element by clicking this plus button. And now we can see that we have index 1 with no material assigned. So you can see that the active material here is still set to index 0. I have no desire to change that. But I do want to have something as a placeholder for index 1. So I will open this menu and choose index 1. And arbitrarily, I can choose any material I want here. So I think what I'll use is M underscore basic, let's say the basic floor material. And these are going to be editable after we have this mesh in our level. Okay, we can assign these material elements in any way we want. Okay, so now that I've specified an arbitrary material for index 1, I have to make sure that the active material matches the index that I've just added. And there's this button right down here that says Material Edits. I want to click that, Assign Active Material. So we'll do that. And now you can see that we've got obviously two different materials on either side of this mesh. But I want to take it one step further because I might want to also be able to edit the edges, the outer edges of this mesh. So now that that's done, I'm going to select those outer edges. And with my brush size set the way it is, I can grab both triangles at the same time. This is a pretty simple mesh. And I want to make sure that I get all four, okay, including the bottom. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing that I did a moment ago, which is to add an additional material element and switch the active material to index 2, like so, and choose something arbitrary. And I think for this one, I'll just choose the default grid. Really doesn't matter what you choose because all of this is going to be editable, I beg your pardon, by the time you use it. So let's see, grid material. I want to make sure I'm using the right one. Prototype grid material. Okay, that looks good to me. Now I have to make sure that before I click assign active material, that I have to double check that I'm on the correct index, which is index 2 in this case. So now I will assign active material. And then once I accept this, there's only one further step. You can see that this new mesh that I've created with, by the way, 3 material indices just has to be saved. That's all. So I'm going to select it and Control S. And now I could even delete this from the scene. And anytime I want to use this mesh, now I've got 3 material indices that I can choose from among. I'm not going to go crazy with materials at the moment, so we'll just use something from starter content. Let's go into the starter content materials. And let's say I want this side to be brick. I can just simply drag that onto there. But maybe that's just for the outside of the building. So the inside of the building, maybe I want that to be the basic wall material, and I can drag that onto there. And the sides can be whatever I determine is most appropriate based on what's, based on what's exposed. For now, I'll choose something random, like poured concrete or something like that. Let's see, where is that? Poured concrete. I know that's a material in here somewhere. Where is it? Concrete poured. There we go. Okay. So now I've got a piece that I can just use to build out a new structure. So we do have an alternative. We can also make those materials the defaults for that particular static mesh. So let's go back into starter content, architecture, and modified meshes. If I open up the mesh editor by double clicking on this, I can assign to each face the material that I wanted to use by default. This will not prevent you from changing it after the fact, but if I wanted that to be a permanent piece that I could use over and over again without having to constantly assign material elements, I can do that here. So on the first face or the first material index, for example, I could choose brick or a material that I've created, for example. And the other material element can be the basic wall. And then the prototype grid, it looks like it already defaulted to that on the sides. And if I save the mesh this way, I can close the mesh editor. And now every time I bring this out into the world, it's already going to have those characteristics. However, I'm not bound to them because I can go back into starter content materials, and I could always overwrite that with something else because, as you know, material indices can always be replaced with whatever material you like. So I'll hit undo there. So now let's go back into the mesh editor. I don't want to make any of that permanent. So let's navigate Control-B back to this mesh. I'll open it up once more, and I'm going to default these out again. So the front is going to be M_ basic wall. And the other side, I think I'm going to default that to M_ basic floor, and we're going to leave the edges set to the prototype grid, and I will save it this way once more. So here is a very, very cool thing you can do. I can now delete this mesh from the world, and I can look in my outliner and determine how many of the 400 by 400 wall meshes I used in my original layout. So I can select them one by one. And if I want to, all I need to do is I can have that mesh selected as well as the mesh that I want to use as a replacement. I can right-click that, and I can choose Replace Actor with the one that is highlighted, okay? The one that is highlighted in my content browser, which is going to show up here at the top. And you can see that that's been replaced. And let's replace this one as well with the same one, Replace Actor with that wall segment. And we're going to do the same with this one. We're going to replace it. So let me zoom out a bit. Replace Actor with this one. And this is the new one that we made, okay? This is the one that has 3 material elements. And therefore, I don't have to worry about the rotation, okay? Because I haven't been keeping track of how these have been rotated. But now I know that they are amenable to having different materials assigned to all 3 faces, because this mesh is just like the original mesh. But the original mesh, remember, this wall has only 1 material element. The one that we just made has 3, and I've just replaced them. So here I can now go into my materials, and I can use whatever materials I want. They can be from starter content or not. So let's just go ahead and put that brick on there. And normally for structural pieces, I make world-aligned materials, but these are all the same size and haven't been scaled, so it doesn't really matter so much. And on this side, maybe I want it to just be the normal wall material. Excuse me. I think I lost my place. Oops, excuse me. That's on the outside. And that's already on the inside, okay? So that is, it looks like element 1. This is just rotated 180 degrees. So that's correct. Basic wall should be on this side. And if I'm worried about exposed edges, I guess I can just make up my mind whether that's going to be visible or not. And if it is, maybe I could make that just the basic wall as well, or maybe I could make it into brick if I feel it needs to match this side of the mesh or that side of the mesh. Or I might not change it at all if there's going to be another wall mesh on this side of it. Of course, obviously this floor plan has not been fully built out yet. So let's now do this again, and let's do it for one of the windows. So let's go back into starter content, or actually I'll just browse to that asset with Control B. And I'm going to grab this asset and copy it, not move, but copy it into my modified meshes directory, get in there. And we're going to rename this using the same convention that I used for the wall segment. So I'll call it SM 400 by 400 window wall. So, oops, I just opened up the mesh editor. I didn't mean to do that. So we're going to right click on this and we're going to rename it. Again, F2 would work if I weren't on this computer. So SM underscore 400 by 400 underscore window wall. Okay, that will work for me. And I'll drag one of these out into the world. And we're going to do basically the same thing, okay? I'm still in modeling mode, so I can go, and I'm still, by the way, in the attributes section. So we'll go to Edit Materials, and this one has more triangles, but it looks like my brush size was scaled correctly, and I was able to select all of those faces at the same time. So now I'm going to add a material element to this side. So we're going to go ahead and add an array element right here. And make sure that before I change it, I assign the active material to the proper index. And again, I'm going to use the basic floor, M underscore basic floor, because we know we're going to be able to edit these after the fact. And then for the edges and also the inner faces of this window here, I want to make sure, by the way, that this is translated up high enough such that I can see the bottom. And actually, let me cancel this out because I should have done that first. Okay, I want to be able to get underneath this so that I can select those faces. Okay, so once again, we'll just start over. Edit materials. Let me select this face. Add a material element, and this one is going to be basic floor. And this is the starter content, basic floor. And now we're going to select index 1 and make that the active material for that index. Now I'm going to add another index. And before I get ahead of myself, I'm going to preempt this by selecting index 2 and select the grid, or whatever you want. Doesn't really matter. The prototype grid is, I think, the one that I used before, not the color, the M_prototype grid. So now I want to do the same thing. Actually, I don't think I assigned the faces yet. So that was an oversight on my part. So I'll have to press that button again. Let's select all 4 outer faces. Make sure we don't forget the bottom. And the inside of the window, we want to make sure that we assign it to those faces as well. And I can assign the active material there once more. You can see now we have index 0, index 1, and index 2 assigned. So I can accept that. And the last step is to, of course, save the mesh. And I can do exactly the same thing that I did for the wall mesh. I can delete this from the scene if I want to. And I can select every time I used a wall mesh. Let's see, how many of these window walls did I use here? Let's select the first one and select the replacement that I just made. And I can, in some versions of Unreal, I find that for some reason on my laptop, if I make a multi-selection here, on my work computer, I can use, oh, actually, it is appearing now. Okay, so let's go to wall window. We'll do all of them as a batch. For every one of these that I use, I want to make sure that I've got this replacement selected. This didn't work for me earlier today for some reason, but it's working now. And I can do this as a batch. Okay, so we're going to replace selected actors with this. And remember, that's what I've got selected in my content browser. So that will do it as a batch. And now each one of those instances has 3 material elements. And before, and nothing's changed in appearance, right? But now I can go into my materials, starter content, materials, whatever you decide. And I can make the outside of the building whatever I want it to look like. And I can make the inside of the building look like whatever I want. Let's say in this case, I use one of the wood materials. Why not? Just for purposes of demonstration. Okay. The interior of this wall, I could change that to wood if I wanted to. These are both window walls, so let's be consistent and use that. These are just the regular walls. I think I've been using this wood, so I might as well stay consistent. And if you feel you need to, if you're going to be placing sort of other geometry, other meshes inside here, and you feel like you have to cover up this grid material, it can literally be whatever you need it to be, as long as it's a material. So I might as well choose anything, like rust. And now I can easily place that in there. And that is, of course, I beg your pardon, the 3rd material index, which is index 2. It looks like I neglected to do the outsides on these window walls, so we'll go ahead and use that brick. And let's look over here. We'll get the rust again. And of course, I'm just making arbitrary choices for now. Of course, you do whatever would be appropriate to your scene. Okay, so that is wood on one side, brick on the other side. This should be brick on the front, so it looks like I made a mistake. So that's brick. Oh, excuse me. No, that's should be brick on the opposite side. Undo. That should be wood. This should be wood. I forgot what material that is. Oak. This is the oak. Yeah. So this is the inside of the building. And this is outside. So, or, it's probably going to be an inner wall. So this is the outside and it's brick. And the inside can be oak. You get where I'm coming from here. Now, I didn't do the wall door yet, but it would follow the exact same procedure, and I could do the same for the floor. Now, if it's only going to be the floor, I don't necessarily need more than one material element per tile because I can assign whatever material I want, and it's only going to be one face showing. But if I were to do a multi-selection of this floor plan and then just sort of make a copy of it and Alt drag up to make a ceiling, I might want to perform the same operation on this mesh because it too only has by default one material element. So I guess the main thing is just be careful, and I recommend not overwriting the default meshes because you might want them to stay as they are and use them when it's called for, but have your own modified versions of them that can accept more than one material on each face. So you've dipped your toe now into modeling mode, and this is very, very handy, especially for building out structures. All right, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you find it useful, and thanks for being with me again on Unreal Engine Study Hall. I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.